It's been over 15 months since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. At first, the West refused to supply Ukraine with modern tanks or planes, yet this approach has changed over time. But are the current arms deliveries enough to guarantee Ukraine's victory over Russia? In today's video, we'll answer these and other questions on the West's arms support for Ukraine. New extensive arms deliveries to Ukraine were announced already at the beginning of December 2022, but it then took many months for it to reach the country. Already now we can say that in order for Ukraine to undertake a meaningful strike on Russian forces, it needs more military support than it currently receives.
From small arms ammunition, counting in the tens of millions of rounds. The last US package provides 22 millions of rounds of small ammunition, to basic small arms like machine guns or rifles, to bigger cannons and ammunition from that, the artillery and ammunition for artillery, through the tanks, the APCs, the infantry fighting vehicle, through air defenses to the Air Force. Ukraine literally need everything, need it quickly and need it in mass. All these deliveries are too slow and too little. They only fill the gaps after the equipment that Ukraine already lost. If West provide Ukraine all this equipment, not in the 15 months, but in the 1 month, we can say that it's too much for Ukraine, that Ukraine don't have manpower to properly use this equipment and maintain the equipment. But if this deliveries is stretched out in 15 months, they are only filling the gaps, because Ukraine and also Russia every day make another losses. Every day some tanks are destroyed, some IVs, some artillery systems. But Russia have means to produce them. They are degraded by our sanctions, but they are still producing and renovating tanks. Ukraine doesn't have this ability, and they fully dependent on the Western support, with the logistical hubs in Poland, with the production of spare parts in Germany, Italy, Spain, and also United States, and whole big logistical chain that brings this whole equipment and spare parts and maintainers for them to Poland and then to Ukraine. Ukraine can still fight in this war because the West provide them ammunition.
The main reason why the West does not provide arms in the numbers that Ukraine would want remains the same. It's the fear of Russia using its nuclear arsenal. However, the West has increasingly been moving past these fears and gradually crossing its self-imposed red lines.
This fear and concern is still there and has always been there from the start of the Russian invasion, that Russia can resort to the use of nuclear weapons against Ukraine, especially. Some have feared also Russia striking against the West, both with conventional and nuclear weapons. So I think this fear is still there, and therefore the arms deliveries to Ukraine are not as big to allow Ukrainians to conduct a successful counteroffensive that would allow them to repel the Russians from and regain all of their territory lost after 24th of February 2022. When Ukrainians have successfully defended themselves, defended Kiev, and then pushed out Russian forces, the West decided to extend the military help. This was also linked to the previous conviction that Ukraine does not have chances against the Russian aggressor, and that Kiev and Ukraine will fall soon, and that will be a matter of days. So when Ukraine survived the Russian attack, the West, especially the US, decided that it will increase and extend weapon supplies to Ukraine, but the strategy was a very cautious one. In coming months after the start of the Russian invasion, the Biden administration and the West in general gradually crossed the so-called self-imposed red lines. So first, there was a decision about artillery deliveries, and then further major decisions on deliveries of major equipment came. And at the beginning of 2023, there was a discussion about the delivery of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles that of Western made. And here, I think it's worth underlining that the Eastern flank countries especially decided very early on such deliveries and were not guided by this fear of escalation or fear of nuclear war, and sent artillery, tanks, and fighting vehicles of post-Soviet times already in spring 2022. And through these deliveries, the Ukrainians were able to repel the Russians and start the counteroffensive in 2022.
The West continues to provide Ukraine with new types of equipment, some of which have been real breakthroughs in this war.
In the last 15 months, we have several breakthroughs, but most of them was in the political and debate sphere. Supplying any tanks to Ukraine was a breakthrough. Supplying artillery, supplying Western-made artillery, this is two different breakthroughs. But in the military side of things, in operational level on the battlefield, the real breakthrough was supplying Ukraine with HIMARS and MLRS rocket systems, because they enable Ukraine to strike deeper in Russian-held territories and destroying the logistical hubs of Russian artillery, the command post, and doing it en masse. Because before providing of GMLRS rockets, Ukraine had some short-range ballistic rockets like Tochka U. But these weapons was in really small quantities, and Ukraine fired almost all of them in the first few months of the conflict. Providing Ukraine with 18 HIMARS launchers and more than a dozen MLRS launchers with sufficient amount of projectiles was real breakthrough, because Ukrainians now can use these assets in mass, and this conflict really needs a mass, really needs a critical mass to be present on the battlefield. Even if Ukrainian gets the most advanced jet fighters in the world, like F-22 Raptors or F-35, but get it only in four pieces or 6 planes, there will be no breakthrough, because the geographical scope of the Russia-Ukraine war is such large that there will simply disappear in the broader conflict.
Providing arms is a multi-layered and complicated process, and involves not just the equipment itself, but the means and resources to maintain it on the battlefield.
Every tank is different, even in the same broader class. For example, Leopards 2A4 and Leopards 2A6 have the same chassis, but different turret, with different electronic systems, with different cannon. And maintaining these tanks is a little bit different. So Ukraine maintainers need to learn both types, or Ukraine needs to have double amount of maintainers. Then the UK supplied Challenger 2s. They have 120mm cannon, like every other Western-made tank, but they have their cannon are rifled, not smoothbore, and the ammunition is totally different. German Leopards or American Abrams use one-piece ammunition with the propellant and warhead, and the British ammunition is three-part, and loader needs to assemble them in the bridge. They need to load the warhead, they need to load propellant, and then they need to load a cartridge to fire them. So maybe they're similar, but in principle they're different. The approach to use these tanks is maybe the same, but approach to maintain sustainment in the theater of operation is vastly different and needs different approaches. Ukrainians are amazing, and they amazed West a lot of times because they managed to figure out how to use it and how to maintain properly. Because for years, West have a dogma that every military need to have only one type of tanks because more than one is too big strain on logistics and everything will fall apart. Right now, Ukraine used more than a dozen type of tanks, Western and Soviet-made. Of course, Soviet-made tanks also need maintainers and also need to be maintained. But Ukraine had before this whole supply chain and the whole logistical framework to sustain this equipment. The problem with the West equipment is to create this whole ecosystem of maintaining them.
Delivering equipment faster and in bigger quantities is only one of the challenges in this war.
The biggest challenge in near future, especially from the Europe, is to acquire the new vehicles and new weapons to replace that we are already sent and to have ability to send more. This is the biggest challenge from the West right now, not from the United States because they are huge, have huge budget and have huge capabilities in this regard, but from European perspective and from Ukrainian perspective, right now Ukrainian gets one of the modern equipment that we can provide them, and in the months to come they get worse equipment in terms of modernity, in terms of capabilities in the battlefield, especially in the tanks. Right now Ukraine gets fairly modern Leopard 2 A6s, Leopard 2 A5, someone older but still capable Leopard 2 A4 and Challenger 2. It's really modern tank. But next tanks deliveries from West will be Leopard 1. Leopard 1 was designed and produced in 60s and 70s. This is not a modern vehicle. The Danes bring them back from museums to train Ukrainians because the only one function Leopard 1 in Denmark are ones in reconstruction groups and in museums, and this batch of 110 tanks that will be delivered in this year comes from deep stocks and need to be not modernized but repaired and bring back to the operational level, because most of the hulls today are rusty. We need to change electronics inside of them and rehaul all engine, because right now these engines simply don't work.
The biggest challenge might in fact be the political will of the West to continue to provide arms, the will of politicians to keep funding the war while degrading their own military capabilities.
Because politicians need to address what the society wants. And if the Western societies don't want to make sacrifices, because if, for example, Spain sent more Leopards to Ukraine, they need to buy more Leopards, and in the last budget there was no place for buying new Leopards, so they need to hike the spendings. If they hike the spendings, they can hike the taxes or make more debt. This huge amount of money, that 2% of GDP is not enough. And we see the struggle in the West to reach the 2% threshold, not saying about 3 or 4% that is needed. So this is the challenge that the West is facing. From Ukrainian perspective, is simply that they need this equipment. Because right now they are on the offensive, they make losses. Every attack is costly in every scenario. This is not the problem that Ukrainians are not prepared to make these advances, but in the warfare, every advance is by trading equipment and lives. So Ukraine needs more to retake more territory. And in some perspective is also number games. Especially if Russia still maintain capability to produce new equipment and to draft new people into their army.
There is also the question of the West's long-term strategy for this war.
So now we are in a situation that could probably lead to freezing the conflict. The strategy is providing Ukraine as much weapons as needed to maintain this freeze line and to repel, to defend themselves successfully, but not to make the Ukrainians able to regain much more of the territory lost. We might be stuck in a situation with a freezed conflict line where with operations and attacks ongoing from both sides, or we might be heading towards a situation that both Russians and Ukrainians might be willing to enter in some peace negotiations. But all this will be only of a temporary nature, since it's clear that Russia has and follows its maximalistic goals to subordinate Ukraine. So that would be only a short-term solution. What we might face in the future is an ongoing war, or a war that stops for a short period of time and then continues afterwards in a political situation that Russia sees more beneficial to itself to fulfill the political military goals it has against Ukraine.
And if you're looking for a reliable source of information on the deliveries of military equipment to Ukraine, make sure to visit our website, where we have a country-by-country division of support for Ukraine. The link is in the description box. And if you found this video useful, subscribe to our channel. It really helps us reach a wider audience with our work.